This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, I am joined again by Wade Fransson in his second appearance. This one's going to be much more fun than the last time. Last time was very heavy. This very light. We're going to be talking about all things book and book publishing. Today, he is the founder of Something or Other Publishing, which they lovingly call SOOP, S-O-O-P. And I'm excited to be talking to him because two things. One, we're doing a couple anthologies together. So all my writer friends who listen to this, get your submissions ready. I will be contacting you shortly. And if everything works out the way I think it will, by the time you all hear this, my books will have moved over to his platform, and I will have spun off the book business to him, which should tell you how impressed I am with him and his platform and the way he does business. It has taken me years to own my own rails. It has taken me a long time to get to the place where I could have books out on my own terms and sell them internationally. So if I'm willing to kind of let someone else take on that time and that stress and all this type of thing and feel confident that my book business will continue to go on as it has been, that should be endorsement enough kind of right from the beginning. But what we are going to find out today is we're going to find out where this little idea came from, a little bit more about this publishing company, a little bit more about Wade, and we're going to find out a lot more about what the future holds for this, small press. So welcome, Wade, to the Cameron Journal Podcast again.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Yes, and I want to jump right in and find out how you decided to start your own small press. Begin from the beginning.
So I'm an author, and the reason I'm an author is my life is beyond fiction in terms of its circumstances and its realities that have molded and shaped me. The circumstances of my life, childhood, were so unique that a number of offers were made to my family members, meaning my sisters and I, about selling our story. And the briefest of insight into what happens when you sell your story is your story doesn't get told at all the way you want it. It has to be Hollywoodized, right? And so the circumstances of my life were so unique that I experienced several times in my 30s telling somebody something about some aspect of my life and having them not believe it, basically calling me a liar. And I realized I needed to write it all down, names, dates, and places, including the fact that I was kidnapped as a child in a domestic kidnapping, smuggled out of the country. The court case went to the Supreme Court of Sweden before it was over. I was in an orphanage after that. I ended up in a religious group that many would consider a cult. Yes, I was in Leningrad at the time Gorbachev was abducted. Things like that just almost beyond belief. So when it came time to writing all that down, one had to ask oneself the question, who will publish this and who will publish a new author and let that author have creative control?
Right.
And so I realized that the only path for me was to self-publish. I did not want to go the vanity publishing route, in which you basically pay somebody else to publish your book for you, because I just didn't want that smell associated with my work. So I also didn't want to just self-publish. So in my, over ambition, my underachieving nature, I decided to found a publishing company. Because, as we talked about last time here, I have experience in business. I was at Countrywide, but before that, I was at Deloitte Management Consulting. So I understood how to evaluate industries and their business processes. And I looked at the publishing industry and I said, if I were to imagine a publishing company that would publish my book and have me be proud of being in that publishing company, what would it look like? How would a publishing company need to be designed today in the world of the internet, the post Jeff Bezos world, right? We all probably know the story, which apparently wasn't really true, of how Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, in which it had to do with him, I forget, trying to find books in a used bookstore or something, or realize that he could sell books cheaper. It was way beyond that, him being a Wall Street guy. But the point is, Amazon started right with books.
So book retailing was ripe for disruption because nobody was in the digital space at the time.
Exactly.
Books
Bingo.
were sold in stores. Nobody really had websites. It wasn't happening online, and that created an opportunity in a space in the very nascent days of e-commerce in the late 90s.
Well, and Amazon did disrupt the book retailing business, right?
Yes.
And to a degree, they disrupted the book printing and distribution business to a degree. But Amazon has itself become part of the old boys, old school, antiquated, 200, 300-year-old book publishing industry, right?
Yep.
So there is still an opportunity for disruption. Now, had I realized the degree to which this would be difficult, the degree to which the margins would be low, I probably would have never started. But here we are now. I published the first book in 2012. So I had pretty much written what I wanted to write, most of what I wanted to write and publish for myself, but I didn't want the first book out of my publishing company to be my own book, right? Because that seemed illegitimate. So I had a friend in Serbia who had done an initial research, or rather amateur research, on war crimes committed by Admiral Horthy, who was the Hungarian regent over Serbia. And Admiral Horthy was a war criminal who got off because Roosevelt needed him in the fight against Stalin.
Mm-hmm.
And even Stalin respected him as a general, right? But Admiral Horthy was responsible for the murder of about 1,000 people, mostly Jews, but also the other typical so-called riffraff, right? Gypsies, homosexuals. They were murdered and thrown
mentally
into
disabled,
a hole in the ice.
anyone they don't like.
Right. So
yeah.
But there are statues of Admiral Horthy as a war hero in Hungary. So this author, Alexander Velchik, had done painstaking research, going to grave sites, getting names, dates, places, interviewing people who were still alive. And he compiled all this. He had 2 small books in Serbian language. We helped translate it, put it into a book that we toyed with calling it Hitler's Mentor, because Admiral Horthy was seen riding around with Hitler, and Hitler looked up to him as the first anti-Semitic leader of Europe and an elder statesman. But we figured that was a little bit too sensationalist, so we simply called it Genocide Revealed, somewhat less sensational than Hitler's Mentor. We're very proud to publish that book in 2012, because in 2015, the UN released its World War II archives and corroborated some of the things in that book. So that was our first book that we published, followed then by a couple of memoirs, romances, whatever. But along the way, what we've tried to do is align the interests of the author, the publisher, and the service providers in a revolutionary online publishing model that has the elements of a traditional publisher, that people want, most of them, but distributes the responsibilities in a more collaborative way to allow everyone in the process a more equitable portion of the benefits. It's kind of similar to the way movies get produced, right? It's interesting that when you see movies, you always have these producers, right? What's a producer? Well, a producer, among other things, is somebody who's taking a share in the profits of that project. So they're compensated when the project is successful, but they're not compensated as much if the project is not successful. So, how do we distribute the responsibility and the rewards amongst all the various people that have to put together a book project? It's a very difficult thing to do, but we've come up with a model that we feel works pretty well, and we're constantly looking to improve it. And that's why we've been growing, and there are about 3,000, 4,000 maybe authors on our platform now.
Yeah, and that's I mean, I think that's quite it takes I think a very modern approach. And the thing about it is like there's, and we have recently been in discussions about all of this and I bring my platform and all this type of thing. And so our conversation has, been around, what am I bringing to the table? And people forget this. In traditional publishing now, the big five are doing that. They like authors who have a platform. You're probably, unless you're Michelle Obama, are not going to get a marketing budget for your book. It'll be your job to do it. That's one of the reasons I actually left the traditional world behind and struck out on my own, because I'm kind of like, well, if I have to do all the work and do all the marketing, I might as well get more of the money. Like, I mean, that's what happens now. So oftentimes is, yeah, you've gone through getting an agent, you've gotten published at Penguin Random House or Simon and Schuster or Hachette or all one of these places. And they, if you're lucky, they'll send you 10, 15 promotional copies in the mail. And then the marketing and selling of your book really is up to you. Gone are the days of book tours and all this type of thing. That hasn't been the book business for 20 years at this point. So now, now that's, I mean, really the impetus is on you. So for those that might, look askance at that sort of thing, you're not getting a better deal at the big five. I'll just say that right now, as someone who has gone down the traditional publishing route and decided to go on my own so I could have more of the money. Having, a responsibility of selling so many books and all this type of thing that's kind of where the industry's going.
You're
Unless you're
absolutely
already really famous, like Michelle
yeah.
Obama.
Well, Michelle Obama is a great example because guess what? She does have a platform. Her platform is that she's the former first lady, right? So
Right. Yeah. So why do they write a check for $5 million? Because they know they're going to sell tens of thousands of copies simply by releasing it. Same thing with Harry and Meghan. That's why these people get these huge book deals, is because they know millions of units are going to move. That makes the publisher happy, it pays the bills for the year. It makes the retailers happy. I mean, everybody down through the whole process is happy because you're hawking paperbacks at $32.95 a go and you're going to sell 100,000 of them. No problem, no questions asked.
So, as you know, Cameron,
Plus
we've talked
ebook and
music.
audio, which are just free revenue stream, sort of thing. So,
As you know, we've talked music and lyrics, right? And so I always relate to things through lyrics. One of my favorites is Bob Dylan, "Subterranean Homesick Blues." I'm really dating myself, but there's this line in there: "Look out, kid, they keep it all hid." Right.
yeah.
And so I call it the lottery mentality, right? They turn it into the illusion that you're going to win the lottery, right? You can somehow be up there with Michelle Obama and Stephen King or any of whoever the hot author is, of the last few years. They make you believe that if you can get published by them, you will also have won the lottery. But it's an illusion that borders on a complete lie. And they're happy to allow that lie to exist in your mind because that's what causes you to chase that prize.
Yes. I mean, and the thing is, and I think it's also important to mention, even when I started in this business in 2005, the book business was very different. It wasn't that. I mean, there's famous authors' names you would know that would not have a career today. Kurt Vonnegut would not have a career in today's book environment. Stephen King probably wouldn't have a career in today's environment, or he would be in small press. Um, E. Jean Carroll, same story. Judy Blume, same story. Margaret Atwood, same story. Most of the big name banner authors came up in the 80s and 90s, Amy Tan, when the book business was different, and you had, in the list of authors, you had the top list that paid the bills, the mid list that kind of kept that made the profit, and the bottom of the list that was kind of at a loss, but you could develop voices out of that. Some people didn't hit their big bestseller until they were a couple books in. That was true of Vonnegut. That was true of Capote. That was true of Stephen King. His first two books didn't sell very well. And actually, his books started to sell better after they got optioned for film. And that kind of created the whole thing. So it was, so when they talk about, success in the grind of the writing business, I tell people, I said, you can't really look to their publishing story, like their path to publishing, as a valid thing, because the business isn't that way anymore. That book business is long gone, 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 gone. And now you have to look at it in the way the business is now, which is very corporate. And it's very hard to get the type of development and mentorship and investment in the small unknown author that used to be really common. So if
And
you're going to go
the
the
mass
traditional
market,
route, you kind of have to, yeah, yeah, exactly.
the mass market kind of doesn't exist in the same way that it used to. It's much, much more fragmented, which
It
means there
is.
are more authors who can become successful, but each of them has to do a little bit more work, and they're never going to be as successful as some of those really big names.
Yes, and I think it's also, I mean, I think you also, and I will say this, if anybody in the creative industries, and this, they talk about this in music a lot. Why do some musicians make a lot of money while some others are broke? Oh, and I'll tell you why. Those that make a lot of money understand the business of music. The same thing is true in book publishing. You have to understand the business of book publishing, how this works, how books earn out, royalties, all this type of thing. And there's great books on that, especially from Donald Mass. Like, to learn that aspect of the business, because ultimately when you're publishing and for sale, your book goes from your passion project and your baby to a product in the marketplace, and you have to understand the business in order to kind of optimize for that.
Well, and speaking of the business, the reason for founding something or other publishing was actually not a business interest, right? As I mentioned, the story behind it, it's a very true, real story. I simply wanted a way, a method to get my voice out there in a way that I felt good about, that I felt comfortable about. I had no illusions that my book was going to sell millions or make me rich. Um, but I had the illusion that there were many more people out there like me who wanted to find a way to have assistance in telling their story, in which they had much more control, but also had the help of professionals so that they could be excited about publishing their story that would be really their story, and yet not be embarrassed by their lack of expertise in the world of editing and proofreading and expression. Somebody to help them sort of train their voice, produce that product, produce that work, and deliver it in a high quality setting that they could be proud of, whether or not it ended up making a lot of money. So the model for SOOP, Something Other Publishing, was to facilitate and provide that middle path to allow anybody who's serious about writing something worth reading and getting it published in a high quality manner without having to sell their soul, or perhaps not accomplish it at all because they couldn't interest the business in their project. So
Well,
there's
and
a
that's, I
human element to
Yeah.
what we've tried to do that has nothing really to do with business, and yet money is necessary. The financial means are necessary to provide for all this. You know, we can't go bankrupt and we're not a charity. So we have to balance all those competing requirements and needs.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the advantages of hybrid small press, which is kind of what soup is. In that, and one of the things that I've found very attractive about this situation is for me, it's really a load of stress off, which I think is great. um I think will allow me to produce more work, because in this day and age, the way the writing business is now, if you want to do well for yourself, you have to have a library of assets, you have to have a library of books, which is why I pumped out 3 in fairly short order, and I've spent the last several years getting ready to do, and I will do 4 books this year. So that, like, that's when, like, when you have several behind you, and this is, Joanna Penn talks about this, Mark Dawson talks about this, when you have several behind you, that's when the money starts to stack up, because people will buy, multiple things. I even found that by book 3. When I released my short story collection, sales of my novel went up. So I was selling both, better. So in that, and so that's very helpful as well. But what I think what also is attractive about this is I get to work with really great, cool people, and maybe get some new marketing channels, and take on some opportunities that might not come to me as a solo act. I wouldn't know what to do with overseas translation rights. So I don't have to worry about that anymore, sort of thing. And I have a couple of projects that I'm fairly confident will get optioned for film and television. And so that, is something I no longer have to deal with anymore either. So the hybrid small press model definitely has some advantages. And I think having, a platform like this available to people, I think, is disruptive. But I think the best part is it brings something that's been sucked out of book publishing, and that's the human element, as you mentioned. Because in the corporate book world, all the humanity got sucked out 40 years ago. I mean, it's bad. Not a bit of humanity to be found down at Simon and Schuster. It's all gone corporate. And I think this type of thing, you've managed to bring it back in a way that's really interesting and productive. And I think that's really cool.
Well, one of the challenges that we have in this industry is um, the cost of producing a one-off product and then shipping and distributing that one-off product. Because if you think about it, yeah, people want to buy lots of books. People who read and buy books, they're repeat customers of books. Um, but if you're the author, and you mentioned this in terms of publishing several books, if you've only published one book, you have one product, and you have to create a brand around that one product. Creating a brand is very expensive. It's all marketing and no sales, right? Marketing and sales are very different. Companies spend millions of dollars creating brand awareness, and then they sell many products through those brands, right? Or they have distribution set up across multiple brands so that they can run a bunch of different brands through the distribution network. So with book publishing, you have to establish the brand for that one author. You have to establish the distribution channels for that one author. You have to establish a number of other things for that one author in that one book, which is why typically you're going to pay 55 to 60% of the cover price to other people just to get the book in somebody's hands.
Yeah.
And then you're going to share a portion of that remaining amount with the retailer, right? So, by the time it's over, there might be 15% of the cover price available for the publisher and the author. And if you're a new author, the publisher is going to give you 5% of that 15% royalty. So you're literally going to make pennies on the book sold. And as Cameron mentioned, they're going to make you do a lot of the marketing to earn those pennies on a $20 book that gets
No,
sold.
and yeah, I mean I price my books fairly economically at 15.95. Um and I mean some by the time it's all said and done, a book sells and my account will have, $5 or $6 less for ebooks, of course. And so it can be a
You're
little bit
handling all the
dire.
you're handling all the aspects of that too, because you can't
Of
afford to pay
course.
some big distributor to do it, right? So,
Right.
which is all part of what Something or Other Publishing tries to do is, try to figure out a way to, make that all work. It's not
Well, and let's and
easy.
let's and let's not even talk about, I've last year I spent $22,000 on branding and marketing for myself and the Cameron Journal and books and all this type of thing. That doesn't count when my first book came out. I did a mailing to every single independent bookstore in the country
Yeah.
about the book to build those relationships, which did turn into wholesale later on. And I have wholesale companies now that order, and but which is great. That paid off. Took a while, but it happened. I mean, it's been tens of thousands of dollars to get to where I am today, and what makes all of this possible. It's been incredibly expensive. And the unfortunate reality is most people don't have it like that to do that, and so being able to partner with someone like yourself and kind of share the burden, share the load, is really really amazing. And that's, I'm looking forward to new horizons this year and all the things that you'll do that I have yet to think of.
Well,
um
let me
and
bring one element out, just one element of how our platform works. We try to do what we call crowdsourcing of readers before we publish the book. So think of it this way. There are all these other business components, the distribution, the marketing, the sales that are going to come after your book is written, right? The author typically is stressed. I got to get this manuscript finished, right? I've got to get this manuscript read by another set of eyes to see what I've missed. I've got to get this manuscript edited in order to even submit it to a publisher. I've got to get this manuscript. So it's all about the manuscript. But what you're not realizing is you haven't done all these other pieces that you're in your fantasy you think the publisher is going to do for you. But to Cameron's point, the publisher is going to come back and say, well, what platform do you have? And you're like, platform, what's that? Right? I've locked myself in my closet writing this book. I haven't talked to another human being in 3 years because I've been working on this book. What do you mean platform? Right? So we get the author out of the closet through our online platform, in which you begin to crowdsource your readers using our platform long before you publish. So we've actually created an online educational model, which, as you're crowdsourcing these readers through this voting process, which is kind of like a Facebook like, except when somebody likes it, they get an email that says, this is not just a like. This is an expression of interest in an author who seeks to publish a book, and we will be emailing you with an offer to buy the book when it's done. If this was not your intention, let us know and we will remove your vote. So we're helping you find out who your friends really are, right? And who might be actually willing to buy a book that you write. So we
yeah,
have this
it's
process,
pre-orders on steroids.
and as you get these votes for your book, you also earn these self-help guides that begin to discuss the different aspects of the book publishing business with you. And there are 3 P's of publishing that we've identified. And they are your product, which is the book itself, not just the manuscript, but the front and back cover, the front and end material. How does your book stack up to other books in your genre? Have you not only written the guts of a product, but are you able to create a product that will sell? Secondly, your platform, which we've talked about. How do people know you? Why should people care about you? Right? What is it about you as an author that will ultimately make people be interested in what you have to say? Your platform. And thirdly, promotion. Can you get your mother-in-law to buy the book? Can you get the people at your workplace, at your church, at your social club? Can you get the person who does your hair to buy your book? Because you should get those people to buy your book. So one of the first homework
And
assignments
this is
for
why it's important to have a log line, be able to explain your book in 2 to 3 sentences. When I teach author platform, I teach this stuff.
right,
So
exactly. And so the first homework assignment on promotion is, who are the first 50 people that are going to buy your book? If you haven't thought about that, we help you think about that, right? And so as you go through this process of crowdsourcing your readers, you're also getting an education so that by the time we're ready to publish your book, these things have been in progress for months, and you've been learning and growing as a person, because what Cameron illustrates here is he's become the CEO of his own platform, of his own book business. He's now, as the CEO, deciding to outsource some of the things that he has painfully learned over the course of several years to a company whose primary job is to take care of those things, and who does them efficiently and effectively in partnership and in collaboration, taking on some of the work, but appropriately leaving some of the work with Cameron, and really structuring the relationship in a way that's used, I think the word modern, that is very modern, using all the various technologies and capabilities that exist today that did not exist when this business was imagined first 200 years ago.
well, yeah, I mean, we've come a long way from the what I would call the old-fashioned way of doing it, where, companies bought the rights to print the book, and then the author, that kind of was, in many cases, it for them, and they moved on to the next sort of thing. And in traditional world, oftentimes, you don't have to start over with a new agent, but you might if they don't represent what you're going to write next. And then they still have to put it out to see if anybody at a publishing house is going to be interested. There may or may not be interest, all this type of thing. It's a whole process. And there's that kind of there was that kind of constant process going to kind of make that happen. And there's a handful of very famous names that have the ability to be published without a whole big long process. So
One of the efficiencies that we
yeah.
have introduced is the removal of the agent. Not that agents are bad, nothing against agents, but the agent is needed when the publishing company. Well, so let me put it this way: the idea here is to structure a relationship where there's as little friction as possible, as little noise to signal distortion ratio as possible, where the flow of communication is simple, quick, easy, and transparent, right? That's why we have the educational process and the self-help guides. In a sense, they help you become your own agent. You're not asked to sign anything until we have fully informed you about what you're getting involved in. And that's in both of our best interests, because if you don't understand what you're committing to, then why do we want to contract with you? We don't, right?
Right.
And if you don't fully understand what we're going to
Drama
deliver,
party of two. No, thank you.
right? Why would you want to contract with somebody if you don't understand what they're doing for you? And we don't want any misunderstanding, because we're growing by word of mouth, right? We can't afford a bad reputation in the new online social world. I think we did have, if you go Google something or other publishing and scam, you'll find some post on Reddit from like 2018 or something, which is terrible. It's there. You can't remove it. It kind of belittles us and dismisses us based on a couple of facts that the person had misunderstood. But you won't find anything more recent, even though we've been growing very quickly and we've been adding authors at a pretty good rate, because that one item wasn't true in the first place, and whatever it was that caused it, we've fixed the bad communication that led to that, right? So we've left it up there. We're not out there trying to clean up our name or our brand on the internet. We know that our name speaks for itself, and we know that if we don't get this relationship thing right, then there's no hope, because we're not going to invest a large portion of our money to try to fix reputation issues.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that's, there's, when you're working with small press, hybrid small press, all this type of thing, the relationship is different. The relationship is more direct. And everybody will tell you that. Poets and Writers, Writer.com, Writers Digest, all the big magazines, all the big blogs will tell you that, the relationship with hybrid and small press is different. And there's a lot of people, including names you would know, that have had a lot of success with small press. And I remember years ago, I read an article from a lady who actually turned down a big five publishing contract because she was happy with her small press out of Texas because they had done something. I read another lady who started out in small press and then moved up later on because there were some bigger things that she wanted to do, and they were happy to kind of let her go and do that. So there's definitely opportunity here for authors to do something really interesting. There's definitely opportunity, in small press to do something great. And I think your model is a bit revolutionary. And I think this is, really, really exciting. So,
Well, let's spend a minute talking about something concrete, and that is our short story contest and our curator program, because
oh yes, yes, yes.
we've just reached agreement, as was mentioned. We haven't signed the contracts yet, but they'll be going out shortly on publishing or on having Cameron join us as a curator and helping us bring forth two anthologies in the next few months. So a curator works with the contributors to our platform to help package up and create that product, but also working with them as individuals, providing developmental editing, especially if we have a type A curator, as we do here, where Cameron has a specific vision for one of these anthologies. And in another case, he's a type C curator, which is a content curator, where he's going to be working with another international media company to package up some of their content and bring forth a volume of curated content that he didn't source, or he may bring in some people to add to that content. But so that's what a curator does. But the way that our platform works is we have an annual short story contest for 25 different categories of fiction and nonfiction. And over the course of the year, we solicit contributions to this short story contest. And there's no fee, which is revolutionary. There's no reading fee, but you do have to qualify your submission by having 50 people vote for it. Why? Not because it's a popularity contest. Those votes do not count at all in terms of the judging of your story. They are in lieu of a submission fee. Why? Because we're ultimately interested not just in giving awards and money to people who write well. We are doing that. But we want to publish those people. We want to put their stories into product that will reach an audience in a profitable manner. So by proving that you have the ability to get 50 people to vote, we also believe that you have the capability of selling that first 50 copies. And by the aggregation of a bunch of authors in one anthology, each one of which has the ability to extend their work to a readership and thus extend the work of their fellow authors in that anthology to a readership. You aggregate that, and you now have the ability of a publishing house to produce a bestseller with a lot of hot market people who instantly want to get that book and buy that book because they have a personal connection to one of the authors in that book, and it also exposes them to the other things. So the contest serves the purpose of bringing a lot of content to us across these stories. The curator gets to give an instant cash reward every time 25 qualified submissions are entered, and submit several of them to the semifinals where the judges judge. Then we'll have a first, second, and third cash prize for each category. And then we have grand prizes for fiction and nonfiction. So one way to get involved in SOOP's platform is to submit to one of those 25 genres, and they're pretty much covering the gamut of anything you can imagine. We don't have a separate category for poetry, but you can submit poetry that you would define as science fiction related poetry or romance related poetry or social issues, you could submit poetry to any one of the 25 categories and it will be considered alongside the other work in that category. So pretty much anything you can imagine that you would write can be submitted to our short story contest, no fees. You can submit as often as you want to the same category or to different categories. We have a way of which we can allocate votes achieved for one story to another story. You don't have to get the same 50 votes necessarily over and over again for your multiple submissions. So we find that it's a really good place for people to start at no cost to begin to understand how this model works and practice the art of creating a great story, which might win prizes, while also learning about the business and how to crowdsource your readership for the stories you're writing.
And I will say, if you are early career, i.e., you maybe don't have a book out yet, you've just put your first book out yet, you haven't had a chance to get published in a journal or anything like that yet. These types of opportunities are your bread and butter. When I was early in the business, I did a lot of stuff like this. I started out writing riffs on old time radio shows. There was a show called Candy Matson, and I did little kind of versions of that, this sort of noir short stories. And entering into contests and different opportunities and things like that is a good way to get your feet wet, to start getting work out, to see what hits, to see what doesn't, to go, to get with the editing process and all this type of thing. And the other great thing, with us working together and my developing the literary fiction side of the Cameron Journal, is you might get other opportunities to get published elsewhere. We never know. So this is, if you're early in your career, this is a great way to get started. You're absolutely right. It's a great way to learn the business. It's a great way to start galvanizing an audience. And if you haven't taken the time to get your author platform together, you haven't had time to get your Twitter going and, maybe make a Facebook page for yourself or do a simple website. This is that time and opportunity to get that sort of thing going, because in this day and age, even the big boys have to do social media. So if you're not in that place in your writing career yet, this is a great way to start. So why don't you tell everyone where to find the contest, how to enter, all that sort of thing, because we're nearing the end where we talk about such things.
Yep, it's the letter SOOP for something or other publishing, soopllc.com. And you'll go to our website, and I don't know if I have the ability to share screen, but you would go to the website and you would just click on submissions, and there you'll see a drop down, and you could submit to an anthology, such as the ones that Cameron will soon be contributing as a curator, or you can submit a short story to any one of our genres, or you can submit your book idea, right? If you want to write a full-length novel, we have that program as well. So also, if you're a service provider, right, we do referrals. We give access to these authors who are maybe looking for editors and proofreaders and service providers. So we have this little ad. We probably should have played the ad here about SOOP, what we are for readers, authors, and service providers. You've seen it because you've been on one of our podcasts, Cameron, where we played that ad. But SOOPLLC.com.
Yes, I mean, there's multiple opportunities in the ecosystem. They also have a really great e-reader program for their titles that is awesome, and you'll be seeing more of that around the Cameron Journal here shortly. I was just writing some stuff for that this morning. So that is a thing as well. So, well, thank you, Wade, for the great conversation and learning more about the book business and how you started doing this and what the model is and everything. This has been really great.
Thank you for allowing me to share it. And looking forward to seeing many of your listeners and current and future writers come on over and check us out.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter, and we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.